Hello and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Carlea. Our topic today, the art of predation, the wiles of human trafficking, Epstein files, and beyond. Our guests today are Azaleea Carlea, the legal director at Legal Momentum, the Women's Legal Defense and Education Fund located in New York City. She oversees the organization's litigation and policy initiatives focusing on promoting and defending the rights of survivors of gender-based violence. Ms. Carlea has served as staff to the U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, helping to advance her agenda on the issues of sexual assault, human trafficking, and domestic violence. Also with us is Iliana Konidaris, a managing attorney with the Fierberg National Law Group. She handles civil litigation and civil rights claims, representing victims and survivors in Title IX proceedings and survivors of gender-based violence in the workplace and cyber abuse. She is also representative of victims of child sex trafficking and lawsuits against predatory websites like Backpage.com. Let's welcome our guests. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mary Kay. It's nice to see you again.
Same here. Now, the Epstein files has really brought human trafficking to the forefront of discussion. Unfortunately, trafficking is not something new. Now, Iliana, I know you litigate this type of offense. Can you give us a rundown of why it's so misunderstood and more about it?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say about sex trafficking is that the threshold under the law is actually much lower than most of us anticipate or expect. So in other words, I think, again, a lot of us assume that there's some element of foreign travel, young girls being sold, kept in a basement, captivity, and all of these extraneous elements that are not necessary to succeed on a claim of sex trafficking under the federal statute, which also there's a civil penalty. There's also a criminal penalty under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which we can refer to as the TVPRA, which was passed in 2000 and has been reauthorized over the years. So that statute, essentially all that you need for sex trafficking is for a minor, some kind of solicitation, enticement, recruitment, and a commercial sex act. So a commercial sex act is a sex act in exchange for something of value to any person. In other words, it doesn't have to be money. It could be obviously material items. It could be job opportunities. It could be quid pro quo. There is a quid. The thing of value has to be associated with the sex act. That's what how the courts have interpreted the statute. But I'm trying to think of an example. It could be a teacher to a student. Mm-hmm. I'll give you good grades this semester. I will get you into the advanced honors course if we can pursue this relationship. Stick with me, have this relationship with me, and you'll do really well in high school. Mm-hmm. That may be considered sex trafficking.
Right. Now, you litigated the Backpage.com case. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little.
There were many, and I was on one of the, yes.
Yeah, Legal Momentum also brought the case. And in fact, that's how Iliana and I, one of the ways that we know each other professionally is because she used to be at Legal Momentum. I am now at Legal Momentum, and we are in the midst of the remission process in terms of the Backpage compensation. But I just want to add a little bit to what Iliana was saying. There is this public perception of trafficking that, like she said, requires some sort of movement, or someone needs to travel across state lines or travel to a different country. The point that I want to make to your viewers, Mary Kay, is that sex trafficking can occur literally anywhere. It can happen in schools, it can happen in the home, it can happen during the course of someone's employment. As long as there is this exchange, that could be considered sex trafficking. Legal Momentum had a case a few years ago, Wisconsin versus Crystal Kaiser, where there was a young woman, I think she was about 16 at the time. She came from a very, troubled background. She had a lot of abuse in her life. She, was in a very vulnerable position, and literally did not have money for food. Like, she needed some money to buy food to sustain herself and maybe some school supplies, because she was in this very dysfunctional home environment. And that's how she ended up putting an ad on Backpage, thinking that, this would be a means to an end for her. And she ended up being, horrifically abused, trafficked, many, many times. And the point I want to make is that these are people, survivors in very vulnerable situations, and there is a very significant power imbalance. And the person in control that exerts this coercive control over the victim, manipulates and exploits that position of trust and this position of power imbalance. So it can happen anywhere, and a lot of it is happening online. It's happening all over it can happen over social media. People could be exploited. It happens in various contexts.
And a lot of times, many of these young people don't understand what they're getting into. They have no idea, from what I understand.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it takes a certain level of awareness and education to identify as a victim of trafficking. Sometimes clients or, survivors that come from, very, traumatic backgrounds, they lack the knowledge and information as to what is considered healthy or not healthy. Or, when you come from a place of trauma, it really colors your worldview as to what is acceptable and what is not.
Mm-hmm. And they prey on these naive minors most of the time to exploit them. Now, from what I understand, some of them are found in group homes and foster homes. Can you tell us a little bit more, either one of you, tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think the thing about trafficking is that you really, just as Azaleea said, you see it everywhere. It doesn't just have to be a group home or foster home, but currently there is a lot of litigation against juvenile detention centers, group homes, and other places where minors are particularly vulnerable and particularly vulnerable to sexual exploitation. So there is, there's been major litigation in New York City under some of the look-back windows for gender-motivated violence, as well as in other states. And so this is an ongoing issue, and it's a known, I think the takeaway there is that it's a known area where children are particularly vulnerable to exploitation, and that requires the utmost care and steadfast supervision and monitoring by any kind of agency, by adults, by the surrounding community, to ensure that the children in the most, who are in the most vulnerable positions are cared for. But again, just as Azaleea said, it can also just be your normal suburban kid online. It can be a mom selling her daughter or her son for sex. It can be one high school kid selling another high school kid for sex. So there's not one prototype of a victim of sex trafficking, especially when it comes to minors. And, we've also seen it with adults too. Obviously, that there are the Epstein victims. Most of them started as minors and eventually became adults. Weinstein victims were adults. I see sex trafficking in workplaces a lot.
And how does that one take place? How does that one take place?
So same type of behavior, this grooming. I love you. I want you to work with me. I stick with me and you will become the top sales manager in New York City. And then, but ultimately, that job offer is contingent on sex and on continuing to perform sex acts as demanded by the owner, or I'm sorry, the employer or business. Yeah.
That sounds like the Weinstein effect.
Right. Well, I was just going to say that there is this idea of this, powerful man, offering the promises of like a successful career or connections, or, I'm going to make you a movie star. I'm going to make you a model. Like, do you want a model? I can get you into the top agencies. We actually did see this happening, with in the fashion industry. There was a lot of that. And in the case of Weinstein, of course, the promise of a, career in film and television, whatever it was. But it's also
too, with Epstein too, with the modeling.
Absolutely. And I think one of his victims talked, very candidly about his promises to get her an education, get her a certificate to become, a masseuse, pay for her for massage therapy school. And when you have survivors that have very limited options in their life and don't have the necessary support system and don't have that person that they trust that they can talk to, these things are very alluring. And sometimes survivors don't have that experience to say this is too good to be true.
They don't have the skill set yet, and that's what they're preyed upon.
Especially when they're so young. I mean, these were literally children.
Right. They're minors. They're minors, no matter what age they are. They're minors under 18. So, in fact, one of the women, well, she was a girl at the time, her mother had cancer, and she was promised to treat, her mother would get cancer treatment if she aligned with Epstein. It's
despicable, isn't it?
Yes.
Just how they prey on people's vulnerabilities. And I think that, there's a lot of victim blaming that goes on, in society. Sometimes, of course, in the courts too, there is gender bias in the courts, of, people questioning, how could you let this happen? How I would never let myself, be exploited in that way. And I really want to, make a call to people to really put that judgment aside and try to look at the world from the perspective of someone that has been, lived through trauma, has been victimized, and has, been in a world where the options and the resources are very limited. Yes.
Right. And then add
the other thing I just wanted to, sorry.
And when you add youth to that, that's a dangerous mix.
Agreed. I think the one point that I wanted to add is that in addition to preying on, victims of trauma, a lot of these victims were savvy, were smart, knew about had wonderful families or parents. So it's not as though I just want to emphasize that there's not one type of victim. A lot of these victims, children inherently are vulnerable to exploitation. Children who have dreams, who want to go to college, who don't have money, are particularly vulnerable to exploitation. But also predators are extremely skilled at making things look normal and nice and healthy.
Social engineering. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. And that's just like Larry Nassar. That wasn't a sex trafficking case. But it was sex abuse of minors that happened right in front of their parents, who lovingly brought them to gymnastics practice, PT, all of these things. So, but normalizing that abuse and making it seem like this is just how it is to be, if you want to be an Olympic gymnast, this is just the hoop that you have to go through. If you want to go to college, if you want to be a masseuse, if you want to be an art dealer, this is just, in the Epstein case, this is just the thing that you have to do.
Kind of like an initiation.
So I think, Iliana, that speaks to the issue of the enablers, the network, the web of the
Exactly.
people around the
Yes,
the primary offender who allows this to happen and
the
turns a blind
enablers.
eye to it.
The ena-
And it's just part of that network. It's almost like a conspiracy, like Weinstein didn't act alone. He had assistants and,
Yeah.
staff, and so did Epstein. And, this, and I'm sure, R. Kelly and, um, Puff Daddy, they all had entourages of people enabling it because these are rich, powerful people. And, they have this entitlement that they can get away with anything. And, in some cases they have. But thankfully, because of the courage of these survivors that have come forward and have, not stopped and have not, been deterred, the survivors came together and they led this movement. And that's why we have, the moment of accountability that we have today. So I think it's really important that we remember that, it is up to, unfortunately, the survivors that have already been victimized and have already been traumatized and have been assaulted and attacked and raped, on top of that, they now have the weight of coming forward and sounding the alarm.
and
And
facing
that's just a testament to how strong they really are.
Yeah, and facing their perpetrators. Except in the Epstein case, he's deceased, but then there's Maxwell who's still alive. And in fact, under the statutes, under the federal statute, 18 USC section 1591, sex trafficking of children under by force, fraud, or coercion, the perpetrator and the enablers get up to 20 years or life in prison. Either way, it runs the gamut, which would include someone like Ghislane Maxwell.
A child is defined as somebody under the age of 18, which is something that Epstein played around with. One of the things that he liked to say was age of consent varies across states and cultures. There's no real age of consent. These aren't children. And I just think that's such a heinous argument. And the fact that the TVPRA defines it as under 18, I think is crucial.
The federal statute.
Federal statute.
Right,
But
right.
some of his victims were as young as age 12. So I don't know how you can say that with a straight face, that in some cultures or in some states the age of consent is that is just obscene.
Now, how can people recognize trafficking? What are the signs and what do they need to do?
Well, I think there's many different contexts. I did want to talk very briefly about trafficking in the context of intimate partner violence.
Sure.
People often think that trafficking happens by, a stranger or someone you meet online, or, like in the case of a professor or, an employer. But a lot of times, sex trafficking can happen in the context of intimate partner violence, where, like, for example, in the case of Giselle Pellicot in France, she was married to this perpetrator who, for years, drugged her and invited dozens of men to their home to rape her while she was unconscious. So it's not this abstract thing that happens over there. It can very much and does happen in the context of intimate partnerships. And we've seen, cases where abusers will traffic, their intimate partners. So it can happen, with just like, regular people in relationships, in abusive relationships. It's not necessarily something that happens over there.
So now let's shift gears a little bit to education. How do we educate people about some of this criminality? Any suggestions from either one of you?
I think what you're doing right now is excellent. Just talking about it, educating your viewers and your listeners, educating the public about what sex trafficking is, and emphasizing that it's not what we talked about in the beginning, something abstract, foreign, that doesn't happen here in our communities. And so some of the concrete ways that states are some of the concrete steps that states are taking, for instance, are making sure that hotels have signs by law to look for signs of sex trafficking. Some of those signs in hotels are changing sheets all the time, violence, complaints of prostitution in online reviews. You have some amazing testimony from victims who inspired a lot of this legislation for signage at hotels or legislation surrounding hotels or places where sex trafficking frequently occurs. And so I think that's crucial, which is laws and legislation and litigation is a crucial form of education to the public at large. And I'm biased because I'm a civil litigator, but I think it's an important way to educate the public about what are the risks and consequences of sex trafficking.
And also just making it much more available in the public discourse, starting from very early ages. We believe that we should have comprehensive sex education that discusses consent, healthy relationships, how to stay safe online. And also, obviously in schools, but also in institutions of health, like, when you go to the doctor, when you go to, talk to your counselor, everyone should be screening for this. And I think that the more education and awareness that happens, because not everyone, Iliana, is going to be able to, retain counsel and start a lawsuit. Not everyone's going to be able to consult with an attorney, but people can consult with their doctors, their medical providers, their teachers. I'm careful about saying clergy because that's a whole other situation. But I think just making it more normalized, screening it in, doctor's offices with like schools, counselors at school, making it more part of the discourse. I know that I think there was a bill recently, not on sex trafficking, but on domestic violence that would require hair salons, staff in hair salons to talk to their clients about whether they're being victimized. And I think that's, something that is so approachable and so part of the everyday fabric of daily life. It should be something that's in the forefront of just our experience. It should not be siloed.
I know there's always the misconception that this happens in the darkness, that maybe it's immigrants that are being made victims, or it's someone in the nail salon, the hair salon, but it's right in plain sight many times. These victims are not immigrants; they're American-born children.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, certainly, immigrant communities are more vulnerable, especially in this climate, and are more afraid now than ever to come forward and report crimes. They're afraid to go get medical care at hospitals. But yes, I think most of the back page, correct me if I'm wrong, Iliana, but most of the back page victims were American-born, young women. And Backpage was raking in millions of dollars a month from these ads. And because we have the Communications Decency Act, the Backpage was able to hide from liability for a long time until the litigation started. Which brings me to another point about the Communications Decency Act, which needs immediate reform. But we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, what did these ads really say? Were they hidden? Was it explicit? Can you give me an idea?
They were very explicit, and they had code language for young women. They were very explicit. There were a lot of photographs, and emojis for different kind of sex acts or whatever it was. So yeah, and a lot of them are still available through the Wayback Machine. You can go and see these ads, which are pretty horrific. But yeah, certainly there's your local police department, FBI, And there's also the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is often referred to as NCMEC. They are a phenomenal organization, and I think it's worth reaching out to them. But I think if somebody kind of closes the door on you, you should keep bothering other law enforcement agencies or organizations or lawyers, whatever it is, for help until you feel that the questions that you have about your child are answered.
There's also the National Traffic Survivors or allies with resources in their state. There's a database you can search by city, state, zip code, and it'll connect you immediately with resources in your area.
We'll
That would be
provide
the first step. And there's also other organizations, that are working on this issue. And certainly you can always call us at Legal Momentum or at Iliana's firm. We can certainly talk to folks.
now.
Yeah, Legal Momentum is a great resource for this. So absolutely.
Now, because this happens so much, and there's so much now, and because of the Epstein, I think more people are their eyes are becoming wide open, especially with the book Nobody's Girl. I think she put Virginia Giuffre, who unfortunately committed suicide, put a lot of this out in the forefront, so people who read the book or discuss it will understand more of the plight of these victims. It's just horrific that these children were ensnared this way. And I find it appalling that sex exploiters like Ghislane Maxwell is getting some leniency where she should be doing hard time.
Egregious and horrific and unconscionable. But I want your listeners and viewers to know that this is happening every day all across this country. And I think that the reason why there's so much attention in this particular case is because we have such a, obscenely rich, finance executive in that world, in that Epstein class, and all these, very rich, powerful, wealthy people ensnared in this. But I would, urge your viewers to realize that this is happening all around them in their communities. And I think that, we should all pay more attention, and we all have a responsibility to show up for survivors, and we all have a responsibility to call it out and provide support and assistance, to the extent that we can, because it's not just, these powerful figures that are doing this every day.
So in other words, see something, say something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all have to show up.
Any final thoughts before we sign off?
I think that help is available, and I think that people should not be deterred from seeking help. I think, Iliana, you and I were talking about this, the Me Too movement, there has been some backlash, but it did open a lot of doors for survivors to come forward. I mean, 20 years ago, like police sometimes would even take a report. They would say, oh, this, I'm not even, this, nothing happened here. I can't do anything. This is between the two of you. And I think that is changing. And that is, part of the legacy of Me Too, that, we do see people being held accountable. We do see the system working, and there is, some justice to be found.
Yeah, just to add.
Have the statutes of limitations changed because of Me Too?
Yeah, so just to add to that point, I think a lot of the statute of limitations have changed directly as a result of Me Too, especially in New York. Vermont no longer has a statute of limitations for sexual abuse. But since Me Too, there have been so many laws put on the books or amended and improved to help survivors. And so even though I think that the Epstein legacy, in a way, it's this 30-year case that started in 1996 when there was no Trafficking Victims Protection Act, right? So in 2000, you get that act. And then since then, in New York City, you get a new law in 2000. And then since that time, since 2018 and after Me Too, there are so many improvements to the laws for survivors and for gender-based violence, that I encourage anybody who thinks that they've encountered some kind of abuse or have witnessed it just to reach out to an attorney. There's so many resources and organizations like Legal Momentum or even private attorneys who are taking calls that are not just you don't have to pay anything. Just call somebody, ask for help. There's so much out there for people. So I encourage survivors to feel a sense of hope. I mean, there are so many of us who are trained to talk to survivors, to use a trauma-informed approach, to believe the survivors who call us. And I think that's the takeaway. That's the legacy that the Epstein survivors have left us, the Nassar survivors have left us, all of the Me Too movement, the Weinstein survivors. That is the legacy that they have given us. And I think through exactly what you're doing, Mary Kay, this is the way to make it to be, a lasting, not just a movement, but the cultural norm. And I think that's what we are aspiring to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is help for the victims. You just need to know where the resources are. Well,
yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. This has been quite enlightening, and
thank you, Mary Kay.
And hopefully it'll help some young people out there. Thank
Absolutely.
you. I want to thank our guests, Azaleea Carlea and Iliana Konidaris, for sharing their insights and opinions on the predations of sex trafficking and assault. I also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guests, visit us online at thelegaledition.com. As always, this information is for general educational purposes. It is not to be construed as legal or personal advice. So please seek a qualified practitioner as to your own legal or personal needs. And don't forget, subscribe online. Find us on Substack, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and now Blue Sky.